I wish that it could be sweet like how beer. Grill steaks every day, kick back and paina. Before celebrating, you gotta put in work. Keep your eye on the prize, your kuleana comes first. On the road to success, I dealt with my demons. That is the reason I've been beasting every season. Plant that bok choy, plant that choy sum. Big ups to my farmers growing with that green thumb. The chef made a volcano with the onion. Core team meetings, boss type discussions. Be sure to pay your dues. Success is never given. You gotta move now, don't wait till the last minute. Setting the foundation to leave something behind. You better make good choices cause we don't get to rewind. I'd rather be Han instead of Takashi and Komomai, but take off your wabaki. Yeah. Yeah. The sun sets in the west will be the last to shine. Hi Hawaii upside down, Kanakas all around. These lands wasn't ceded, they belong to the crown. Cores on the ground, cores on the pu'u. Aloha everyone.
All right, welcome everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce you all to today's panel webinar, Honoring Indigenous Knowledge and Trans-indigenous Futures. This is our last event for this year's UCSD Native American Heritage Month celebration, and we're very proud to be able to present something that is forward-looking for the future in terms of Indigenous studies and Indigenous collaboration. On behalf of the organizers of this event, I'd like to welcome our panelists and also you for attending today's discussion panel. And before I begin, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So this presentation is being broadcast from land that is in the Kumeyaay territory. The UC San Diego community holds great respect for the land and the original people of the area where our UCSD campus is located. The university was built upon the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. So today's presentation will be primarily a Q&A session for our panelists. We'll have some opening remarks where we'll ask the panelists to kind of describe what Trans-indigenous Futures means to them in their work and in their activism. We have some prepared Q&A for our panelists, and then we'll have an opportunity for those of you who are participating as guests to provide your own questions to our panelists to ask about the themes of today's talk. And then we'll have some closing statements at the end to talk about where the trans-indigenous movement goes from here. And I'd like to start by first introducing our distinguished panelists. First, we have Dr. Keolu Fox, who is a Kanaka Maoli, a native Hawaiian, an assistant professor here at UC San Diego, who's affiliated with the Department of Anthropology, the Global Health Program, the Haleigiolo Data Science Institute. Ooh. I tried. And the Climate Action Lab and the Indigenous Futures Lab. His research interests include genome sequencing technology, genome engineering, point-of-care technology development, and indigenizing biomedical research. Paul Punahele Kutzen is a Kanaka Maoli hip-hop artist, educator, born and raised in the slums of Makaha on Oahu's west side. He teaches youth from disadvantaged backgrounds the power of storytelling through hip-hop. He's the first ever Bacardi Iron MC champion and the 2019 Nahoku Honohono Hip Hop Album of the Year Award, winner for his debut album, From Beneath Mount Ka'ala, which chronicles the realities that many Hawaiians face living along the Waianae coast. In 2019, he spent 6 months on the front lines against militarized police and sound cannons, protecting Mauna Kea from desecration. Music has led him around the world, sharing stories of resistance and resurgence that add to the collective struggle of all oppressed people. Dr. Stan Rodriguez is a U.S. Navy veteran, native linguist, inspired musical can rattler, devout educator, and a student of local native culture. He's a member of the Santa Isabel Band of the Iipai Nation, which aims to improve lives for all Iipai through economic development and cultural preservation. Dr. Rodriguez also sits on the board of the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, whose vision is to strengthen language and cultural revitalization. He's also a board member and instructor at Kumeyaay Community College, a college with a special focus on Kumeyaay history and culture, and there he teaches the Kumeyaay language sequence. And finally, Dr. Jamaica Heolimeleikalani Osorio is a Kanaki Maoli Wahina artist, activist, and scholar, born and raised in Palolo Valley to parents Jonathan and Mary Osorio. Let's see if we can get the slide going there. Heoli earned her PhD in English with an emphasis on Hawaiian literature in 2018 from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where she is currently an assistant professor of Indigenous and Native Hawaiian politics. Heoli is also a 3-time national poetry champion, a poetry mentor, and a published author. She's a proud past Kaipuni student, Ford Fellow, and graduate of Kamehameha, Stanford University, and New York University. Her book, Remembering Our Intimacies, Mo'olelo, Aloha, Aina, and Ea, is forthcoming with the University of Minnesota Press in fall 2021. All right, so thank you all for participating in today's panel. I'd like to stop sharing my screen. There we go. So I'd like to start this discussion off with just an opening question that touches on this theme of trans-indigenous futures. In Trans-indigenous Methodologies for Global Literary Studies, author Chadwick Allen writes that it is critical to acknowledge the mobility and multiple interactions of indigenous peoples, cultures, histories, and texts. Allen's project reminds us to understand how settler colonialism, imperialism, and other histories of anti-indigenous violence have manifested across indigenous contexts, and how, at the same time, moving towards a trans-indigenous method allows us to imagine resistance, reclamation, and decolonization through mutual struggle based on solidarity across continents, oceans, and islands. Through this lens, what do trans-indigenous methodologies mean to you in your work and in your activism? I'm going to go ahead and start with Keolu.
All right. Should I turn my camera? Here, let me.
Yeah.
You can see me good? Hear me good?
Yes and yes.
All right. Yeah, I think, well, thanks to everybody for having me here and to get to participate with these Kanaka Maoli thought leaders. And obviously, Stan, congrats on completing your PhD. And for me, much of this has to do with creating opportunities for solidarity between our communities. As a scientist, mostly focusing on medicine, I'm really more concerned with access and participation, and more recently, data as a resource and the whole movement and solidarity around Indigenous data sovereignty, and how our communities need to recognize this and get in a position where all of these kind of situations and scenarios with extractive processes kind of keep happening. It's like Groundhog Day, but with just different resources. So hoping to recognize all of those things. But again, thanks for having me here, and happy to field other questions.
Thank you, Keolu. Punahele, can I ask you to also comment on this idea of trans-indigenous futures in your work and in your activism?
If the Aina's on the line, then I will never run. If we gotta bring the flames, I'm always pulling down the sun. They disrespect my culture and they claim to be Pono, then stop the development. Defendo Hiki Lolo. You know how we roll, we kill oppressors on the track. And go tell the military that we want Makua back. Protect Mauna Kea, protect Pohakuloa. They tried to silence us, but my people taking over. More knowledge, more wisdom, all these young Hawaiians driven. Because our ancestors signed the Kumeyaay petition. East side, west side, and the side and every side. It doesn't matter anyway, because we got that Hawaiian pride, love for my people. Not a heart filled with hatred, but how can them non-Hawaiians say our sacred sites ain't sacred with the dark side killers? So shake your uli uli. Hawaiian patriots here to make the system huli. Yeah. So basically, there's an olelo no ea, or a Hawaiian proverb that states, "Ohe hana nui ke alu ia, no task is too big when done together by all. And I feel that when Indigenous people build solidarity, we're able to form like Voltron to save the planet and work towards accomplishing goals such as land back. And yeah, I love uniting with all of my Indigenous peoples around the Honua, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you guys.
Thank you. That was awesome. Stan Rodriguez, could you give a comment on where you see Trans-indigenous futures and in your work and activism?
Can you let me open up my
Your camera?
video? Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, peña ma tipe cham. Estamos ya chuño ma copa wis konang. Peña way huyu pe ya katocha enya kawaki we. Ya pum mayum nya way. Nyup pashen. Ya pum spell what. Ya pum kuslawat. Ya pum ya tike. Mayum nipe pipayo. Ni kuchu mayo. Ya pum ya way eskuya. I want to thank all of you for coming here. My name is Stan Rodriguez. I'm Ipai Kumeyaay from here in Santa Isabel Reservation. And when we talk about our people coming together, many of us, we've had the same narrative for the Kumeyaay people. Our religion was outlawed until the Freedom of American Indian Religion Act was passed on August 11th of 1978. Prior to that, we did not have the same protections that the rest of the American people had. And also our traditional ceremonies, our traditional dances were outlawed, our language was outlawed until, and part of that was with the boarding schools and other things that were going on, but we can learn from each other. We have learned from each other. I have been able to go to the Kumeyaay schools and see what has been done over there and learning, parts of what they do, bringing them back home to our people. And it's a reciprocal thing. People can learn from us, taking back with them. We all learn from each other. In other words, we all have something to teach each other. And for our people, the Kumeyaay, our people have been cut in half, our traditional territory, by the international border. Kumeyaay's in Baja, they're struggling under other problems, such as the escuela bilingües, and on the south, they speak Spanish. Entonces nosotros necesitamos aprender a hablar español por practicar con ellos. So being able to be trilingual, being able to be able to cross the border, to be able to let people know that we are not extinct. And last thing I want to say before I shut my snoot is this, and the two gentlemen that spoke before me, it really touched my heart what you're saying, because when we talk about activism, when we demonstrate our culture, when we practice our culture, that is resistance. When we speak our language, that is resistance. When we sing our traditional songs, that is resistance. And when we when we are in our traditional lands, when we still continue to occupy our traditional lands, that is resistance. And our resistance, we come together, we become powerful. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. And finally, and last but not least, I'd like to invite Dr. Osorio to comment on her perspective on trans-indigenous futures in her work and activism.
Mai kako o no o Jamaica Heolimeleikalani Osorio, he kupa no kaaina o Palolo. But I'm zooming in now from Wahiawa on the island of Oahu. Such a great question, and it's really awesome to be able to go last and to hear how much I would just repeat from Keolu and Punahele and Stan. I think what I will add is saying how trans-indigenous futures enables us, that methodology enables us to decenter empire and decenter settler colonialism in order to build pilina intimacies, kinship, networks of solidarity that allow us to build and make the state itself, make settler colonial states, make empire less relevant. And I think that's really important. It's true that when we build solidarity with each other, we are more powerful than the sum of our parts, but there's also something to be said about the way that we, both in our attack of these oppressive states, we can attack them, but we can also circumvent them, and we can build solidarities with each other. And I'm looking forward today to discussing what that kind of looks like on the ground through the kind of activist work that I know many of us on this call have been involved in. But to me, that's really huge, because there are different ways we can attack these systems, but ultimately we do a huge service to ourselves when we choose to live as sovereign beings, and we choose to create our own networks outside of empire with each other. And a lot of that has to do with language. I love what Stan brought up about the way that empire and imperialism actually severs our communities, and language is one of the ways that happens. In the Pacific, there are many of our kin in the Pacific who we struggle to build with because of that language barrier. Perhaps they were colonized by the French while we're colonized by Americans and British, like in Aotearoa. So even returning to our traditional languages offers us connection back to each other as well. So I'm really interested in those ideas and all the ways that we can make the state and capital and all white supremacy less and less relevant in our lives as we build these trans-indigenous networks.
Thank you, Dr. Osorio. So now we've introduced the important people in this session. I want to make sure I introduce myself and also my co-moderator, Joan Marie Ibanez. I am a professor of physics here at UCSD, and I'm very interested in the Indigenous perspective, particularly as my work as an astronomer. And so I am at the front lines on the other side, but not really on the other side, because I really want to understand how we can work together to find solutions, particularly around issues such as Mauna Kea, as we will talk about a little bit later. And Jean-Marie, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. My name is Joanne Marie Ibanez. I'm a second-year PhD student at UCSD's Literature Department. I'm currently in the process of figuring out what my own research looks like, but I know it's at the intersections of multicultural U.S. histories and Indigenous knowledges. So thank you for allowing me to have the space and time to meet with you all today.
So Jean-Marie is going to go ahead and start our prepared Q&A session. So I'll leave it to you.
All right, thank you to all the panelists again for sharing this space today. We're going to begin this prepared panel with Dr. Osorio. And so the first question I want to ask is, one of the visible examples of a trans-indigenous movement is the protection of Mauna Kea. And Dr. Osorio, you have written extensively on your experiences with the movement. For example, in your Flux article on the front lines of Mauna Kea, you write, "When the Mana Wahina took the road, we remembered the teachings of our kupuna, we sang our mele, chanted our oli, and even danced our hula. We offered aloha and care to each other and to the police officers who stood in opposition to us." Now I'd like to ask specifically with your own positionality, what was it like to come together with other women as protectors in these moments?
Yeah, it's a great question. In order to answer the question, I want to give really quickly a bit of history about the movement to protect Mauna Kea, because a lot of people who might be keying in today or who have seen what's happened in the last 2 years might think that this is like the first stand that Hawaiians have taken against telescopes and development on that mountain. So just really quick 101 history of Mauna Kea. There are 13 existing telescopes on the mountain, all built without the consent of Native people, all built on land that by all legal standards belong to the Kingdom of Hawaii. Those are stolen, unceded, seized lands. This is made possible through all kinds of strange legal mechanisms. Ultimately, the university that I work for has the master lease that they basically give these leases out to corporations and other universities to build telescopes and auxiliary buildings. But it's important to know that every single one of these telescopes was protested and was stood against by Native Hawaiians and allies starting in the late 1960s. This particular telescope, the 30-meter telescope, also known as the TMT, when it applied for a lease, I believe it was like 2009, 2010, was immediately met with opposition. It would be the largest, most devastating structure built at the highest peak in the Pacific, one of the most sacred sites to our people, and within a conservation use district on our island. So it's supposed to have the highest level of legal protections. so there was opposition from 2009, 2010-ish. There was a huge uprising for us. It seemed really huge at the time in 2014 and 2015 in the disruption of the groundbreaking ceremony. Dozens of Kemeyaay protectors were arrested. And then there was a bit of a frontline lull because it went back to the courts. And then the courts decided against us. And then we arrived back on the Mauna on early July 2019 and basically stayed there for 9 months. The event that Joanne Marie is referring to, the Mana Wahine line, took place on July 17th, 2019, immediately after the arrest of 38 kupuna, also known as elders. And to me, it's one of the most, well, it's one of the most meaningful moments of my life, but it was also a massively important moment in the history of this movement for Hawaiian sovereignty and liberation, because it signaled the beginning of what would be the largest frontline engagement of Hawaiians since the protesting of the annexation in 1897, 1898. But to speak more directly to your question, what does it feel like to stand in that line with those women and to protect that Mauna? I think unless you are thrust into those kinds of opportunities and moments, it's really hard to understand the power of what it means to actually stand and protect a sacred site. And how that protection and standing side by side with your people also enables you to protect each other. So one of the biggest things that I took away from that moment is that we all knew that we came to the Mauna, we came to the mountain to protect her, to block the movement of construction vehicles, to assert our sovereign voice of authority over that aina, over that land. But most of us, I would say, myself included, didn't know that we were going to fall in love in the truest sense with the people beside us, that these people, we would lay our bodies down to protect these people, these women, these kupuna, and the men who stood at our backs, and the mahu who stood at our backs, with our lives in the same way that we would do for the Mauna. And so I think it's important to understand, Puake says, we know that the Mauna could shake off these telescopes at any moment, that the Mauna has, the land has the control over this, and yet we call ourselves protectors. But what we're really doing in these moments is that the Mauna is offering us an opportunity to reestablish what it means to be Kanaka, what it means to be Hawaiian. And that's a really empowering thing, even when you're met with this extreme violent force, riot police, LRADs, the threat of all kinds of force used against you. So that's the thing that really meant the most to me, is that it was really clear in a split second that I was not just there to protect a mountain and to stop the building of a telescope, but that I would have given my life for any of the women who stood beside me, many of whom I didn't even know their names, but became in the malu of Mauna Kea, in the shade and protection of Mauna Kea, became family.
Thank you, Dr. Osorio, especially for pointing out the importance of community and kind of its spontaneous beginnings sometimes. I also want to shift this to Punahele and relate this to the same question. So as you recently released an album, Beneath Mauna Kea, which chronicles your experience in this movement, we're curious, what did you see in the struggle that represents a trans-indigenous movement specifically?
So I could brag about myself and tell you my experiences, but I'm gonna be quite honest and say that Hawaiian men, including myself, we need a lot of work, and we need to, work on giving our sisters, our Mana Wahine and our Mana Mahus, a platform. And I won't talk about myself. I'll talk about my hero, one of my many heroes, Kumeyaay, who just spoke before me. So here goes. Before you seek sovereignty, you better practice it. Toe to toe with the police, I'm where the action is. Everything we do is for our mo'opuna, taking the stand so their futures don't end up ruined. Not afraid of the LRAD or the National Guard. 11 hours straight, my heroes chained to the cattle guard. Heoli and Malia, Kumunoi and Kumeyaay, Kumukale Koa, Uncle Walter Kamuela and Mahi'ai. freezing at 3 a.m. until the sun scorched above. Or for the La Hui with their hearts filled with love. I hope you get to stand before it's your time. That's why our cool Punas chose to be placed on the front lines. A staunch aloha aina, that's the Maoli in me. I'm the small axe that swings towards their big, big tree. And the term Hawaiian homes is a joke to me, because every piece of land is Hawaiian homes to me. So basically, Mauna Kea is the trans-indigenous movement because we all share the same struggles, the same oppressors. The people that brought things like the LRAD and tear gas and all the tactics that was used by the police on top of Hawaiians on Mauna Kea was implemented first on Palestinians, then used on people at Standing Rock and at the border. And, you know, all of our struggles is one. So, yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
Honoho.
Thank you, Punahele, for that very wholesome answer. I'm going to shift now to Dr. Stan Rodriguez. So Dr. Rodriguez, in October 2018, when the Polynesian voyaging vessel Hikianalia visited San Diego, members of the Kumeyaay Nation paddled out to meet it in traditional tule boats that were built for this occasion especially. So please tell us about that process and how this meeting of Indigenous watercraft may shape your vision of a trans-Indigenous collaboration.
Thank you. For our people, when Juan Cabrillo first landed here on September 27th, 1542, until they came back again in 1769, there was time for the Kumeyaay people to prepare. However, it was not what we expected when they came. They attempted to subjugate our people through the missions. So when they arrived in 1769, they pushed our people, or our people had to retreat up into the mountains. So a lot of our native epistemology, when we refer to our ocean organic science, became dormant in many parts of Kumeyaay territory. So one of the last places where Kumeyaay ocean science was still active was in Baja in Mexico. And one of the last families, they would go down to La Misión so that they could harvest salt and fish and do things like this. So, and it was just a few elders that had this science left. So we wanted to reverse that shift that was taking place. And part of that was making tule boats. And in our creation story, it talks about the islands off the coast of San Diego, that there was a time when our people used to walk to them. There were mountains. And fishing, our people would even harvest whales using tule boats. So we wanted to bring that back. And to Kumeyaay Community College, we got together with the people who still had knowledge of it, and we recreated the tule boats. When we first made the tule boat, then we were able to launch it out, and from 1 came to 3 to 7 to 12 to 24, and this again, it helped to reaffirm our connection with the ocean, which is in our creation story. So when our friends, and I'll call them our relatives from across the Pacific Ocean came, Hawaiians, Tongans, Samoans, Tahitians, Fijians, they came to San Diego, wanted to meet them. And when a group of Hawaiian people came, they were met by the Hawaiian group that was living here in San Diego, and we also launched tule boats to meet with them and greet them, welcome them into our territory. Because when people come as friends, then we give gifts. And there are certain protocols that are said, such as if I go into your land, into your territory, I'm going to say this: I have come to visit. I have not come to fight. I would like to meet with your leaders and pay my respects to them and to all of you. We come here to visit. And they did the same with us. They honored us, so we wanted to show them that. And there was a lot of cultural exchanging that took place. And with that, it not only good feelings, but it also empowered both groups. That we've done this once, we should do more. We need to do more cultural exchanges. We need to have more times when we can sit down together and talk about the problems that are going on. You know, and you know, when you're talking about what's happening with your sacred mountain, you know, we're having many of the same problems with our border wall too. But you know, to be able to share that and to strategize how we can take care of our land, because the land is our mother. She takes care of us. We need to, it's a reciprocal relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. And actually that transitions perfectly into this idea of this conversation of Indigenous knowledge.
That's all I have for that.
Thank you. And the sciences as well. And so I'm wondering if Dr. Keolu Fox, if you can speak on this question of, is it possible to perceive tensions across Western sciences and Indigenous knowledge systems as a generative space? And if so, how do we begin this process? And if it already is happening, how do we continue this?
Great question. And just to piggyback on pretty much what everyone else has said, like thinking about this in terms of like science, right? And there's all this tension around and conflict around like, oh, is it culture versus science? No, that was never the case. Especially with respect to Mauna Kea, it's always been this like settler colonial position of hierarchical science and hierarchical knowledge. If you look back in our history, in our Kumulipo, we've been philosophizing and understanding systems of biological complexity and natural selection since, I mean, we can remember, it's documented in our chants. And so, you know, that is something that needs to be acknowledged. This is not just like distinct to Kanaka culture and knowledge. This is a construct. We've been valuing and honoring local complexity for literally thousands of years, 10 millennia, greater than that even. So that's like the starting point and position. Now, with respect to Indigenous futurism, I can point to some incredible characters and inspiration in Hawaii. You know, King Kumeyaay himself, the first time he saw a cannon that brought it was like, how do I get one of those on a va'a? How do we do this? How do I use the best tools that are available? Let's not forget, we had electricity in Iolani Palace before the White House. We, you know, there are so many different ways in which we've been living in the future and thinking about the best ways to use the best technologies. We've never been afraid of this. We've never been shy. And I think a lot of our trans-indigenous movement and the way we're recognizing how we should prioritize questions coming from Indigenous communities is the move, right? So again, back to Mauna Kea, it's like a lot of different entities are seeking authorization, but they weren't seeking consensus building with our community. I see this happening now too. There's another broken telescope in Puerto Rico. It's such a parallel. It's like, are you going to clean up your opala, your rubbish, before you want to make something new? It's like a child, you know, clean up your Legos. Don't try to continue to desecrate our Aina. This is literally part of our origin story. Now, as we kind of move into the future, because it's kind of interesting, because now I live in Kumeyaay Nation, but I'm from, my whole Ohana is from Big Island, way back, original canoe style. And so I often think about ways to create projects in solidarity that bring our communities together, and it's going to be a beautiful future, and it's going to involve a lot of the characters that are on here. And really, it's about ways that we use the best technologies available to further our agenda now. It's that time. So we're looking forward to that. But thanks for the question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fox. And now this next question is opened to all the panelists, but primarily also to Punahele, Dr. Rodriguez, and Dr. Osorio. So your work is rooted in language, art, and activism as forms of resistance. And we're curious how you have used these avenues to shape the futures you collectively imagine and catalyze. And what unique contributions do art and language specifically make towards trans-indigenous futures? And so whoever would like to speak on this first is more than welcome to.
Okay, I'll go. Okay, I was staring at Punahele, seeing if he wanted to lead us off in song. Language, literature. Okay, so as a Hawaiian, and as a Hawaiian who studies literature, and mostly I study literature written in Hawaiian, but before that, I'm probably most well known as like a poet who writes primarily in English. It is really hard for me to get away from the feeling that everything I say in this language is tainted by this language. That there is not just something lost in it, but there is something really insidious that is like imported into the things that I say through the English language. And so on the one hand, when we think about this trans-indigenous future, we think about the worlds that are made possible beyond this status quo. I think the only way we get there is as we continue to cultivate our relationship with our indigenous languages. One of the first things I tell my students, I mostly teach Native Hawaiian and indigenous politics classes, anywhere from like the 100 level to the 600 level at UH Manoa. And one of the first things I tell my students in almost every semester is that if you really want to be about this work, whether you're Hawaiian or not, you got to learn the language. And it's not just because all the best, most legitimate, most just sources are written in Hawaiian, and that is true, but it also is that when you can learn to speak, in particular Hawaiian, a language that comes with an archive of about 1 million pages of writing written in our own language, you also open up an entire other universe. Your vision of our past explodes into something far greater than just looking at the Hawaiian Kingdom as an alternative to this, the status quo that we're living in right now. You get stories about Hi'iaka Ikapoliopele, you get stories about Umiali Loa, you get stories about Kamapua'a, you get stories upon stories that offer you thousands of other visions of ways that we can live in relationship with each other and with our land, and in ways that sustained us for generations. So I think that, without speaking for other people from other nations, from other lands, as a Hawaiian, I know that the way forward into the future starts with re-engaging that intimate relationship with our language, because otherwise our vision is, we're wearing blinders, right? We can only create what we can imagine. And the English language, as amazing of many things that people have created through the English language, it is very limited in its imagination. And Hawaiian is very expansive, and it gives us an opportunity to see the world in such a different light. When we go back to that idea of trans-indigeneity too, if we go back as a people to speaking Hawaiian as our primary language, and Maori speak Maori as their primary language, and Tahitians are speaking Tahitian, and Samoans are speaking Samoan, and Tongans are speaking Tongan, at least, and of course I'm being very like Polynesian centric, we can use this across Oceania, but our languages are so similar. And imagine the things that we can build when we return to those stories that we share. And when we learn them really intimately, then we also see how they're connected to the stories of West Papuans, and folks in the Marshalls and folks in Guahan. So to me, both in the visioning, language is everything, but also if you look at the movement to protect Mauna Kea and the way that it's exploded, especially in the last 2 years, almost none of what's happened in 2019 and 2020 would have been possible had it not been for such a concerted effort towards reviving our language starting in the 1970s and 80s. We would not know how to stand in the way that we stand if we didn't speak our language. We would not be able to do protocol 3 times a day on the ala if we didn't know our language. So it is both theoretically really important, but also practically our contemporary Hawaiian movement has been fully enabled by a return to Hawaiian language and literature.
Thank you for that, Dr. Osorio. Punahele, would you like to speak on that point in the relationship of language and your own work as resistance in art?
Yeah, we have a olelo no eao that states, ika olelo no keola, ika olelo no kamake. In language, there's life, and in language, there's death. And part of me as an artist, I started creating and using hip hop as a tool to speak because, you know, my grandmother didn't want to teach her kids or her grandkids Hawaiian language. And, you know, I feel like it caused a lot of pain, ripping out your olelo makuahine, your mother tongue. And I felt lost. I felt like I felt in Hawaiian and I thought in Hawaiian, but I couldn't speak Hawaiian. And it's only up until now that I am actually going back and learning my language. And it's also the reason that I teach incarcerated youth and at-risk youth how to use hip hop as a tool. It's to provide another outlet of language until my students, which are Polynesian, Micronesian, Hawaiian, until we find our own mother tongues and connect back. And yeah, eventually, who knows, I might just start writing strictly Hawaiian music one day soon if I keep staying consistent. And I know that I'm finding myself. And I'm going off topic right now, but a beautiful thing that I noticed is I got to spend time with a Kumeyaay man by the name of Connor. And he'd always tell me about his cultures and traditions. And we have a word, we have a saying, malama aina, to care for the land. And I heard it's super similar to Kumeyaay. And my friend Connor always talked about this dude named Stan and how Stan always helped mold and shaped him and help him connect to culture. And, you know, it just shocked me right now that this dude I heard so much good stuff about is on this Zoom chat with me. So big mahalo and big aloha to Stan, because I know how you impacted your people. So yeah, thank you.
Dr. Stan Rodriguez, would you like to add a little something to this conversation? I think it's really great that you guys can be in relation this way virtually and be meeting in this space.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, Connor's my nephew, and it's incredible how we all, you know, it's a small world. We get to know each other, run into each other, either in New Zealand or Hawaii or wherever we go. You know, we run into each other. Which is the Kumeyaay way of saying mahalo. But what I wanted to say, you know, when we're talking about language and how language is important, I have to share this. When I went to Hawaii around 2002, and I had an opportunity of going to visit one of the Kumeyaay schools. I asked if I could go see, and the instructors were busy doing lesson planning. And they had these sheets on the wall. They were all talking in Hawaiian, and it was very animated. They were going, and I just sat there for an hour and I was listening to them. And then they came out, they talked to me in English, and they said, so what did you think? I said, you guys are incredible. I mean, what you are doing, and, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, incredible what you've done, you know, with your language, because none of them grew up speaking the language. But here they were engaging in the language, and it was, I mean, it touched me on a visceral level. And I had to ask, Likert scale, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself? And the most fluent person said, I rate myself as a 5. And I said, to me, I thought you were like a 28 or something, or 1 million. You know, you're incredible. And they said, well, I'm redundant in a lot of what I say, but, you know, we can still communicate. So they went on to tell me that when they first started learning at the University of Hawaii, that they all rented rooms in the same apartment complex. And they made a pact that what they were going to do, whatever they learned, they were going to use it with each other and replace English with their native Hawaiian language, decolonizing themselves. And they said it was power, it was their secret language. It was something that nobody could decipher. So those lessons that I got from Your people, I took back with the Kumeyaay. And when I teach language, I tell them that this is our secret language. What people learn, unless we let them in, they won't know. We took that lesson when we went to Standing Rock and protested the No Dapple, the pipeline. And there were Native Hawaiians out there, in solidarity. Again, that trans, native, connection. There were Maoris from New Zealand. There were people from Australia. We were all together. But when we started talking about what we were going to do, and we noticed there were people who we did not know around, we started talking in Kumeyaay. And that was power. People did not realize what was going on with that. And people who did not speak their language, they came up and said, we want what you got. That was the same thing that I was thinking when I was with the Hawaiian people at the Kumeyaay school. We want what you got. And that sharing that has been a powerful thing. And when we've gone to the border wall and the border patrol are there and they speak English and Spanish, but they don't speak Kumeyaay, that's power. And that's power of resistance. That's power of solidarity. It's an incredible feeling. And thank you again, my friend.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez, and thank you for concluding our prepared panel questions on that note. Just very strong, very wholesome, making these connections. At the moment, if anybody from the audience has any questions, please post them to the Q&A. At the moment, I'll see which questions that we do have. I see that we have a few from anonymous attendees. If it's from an anonymous attendee, I'll read the question out loud, especially if it's a long one. And if I see that your name is stated here, I'll ask you to unmute yourself if possible, or we'll have someone behind the scenes unmute you so you can ask your question personally to the panelists. So we'll transition now to this open Q&A with the audience. And the first question is from an anonymous attendee, and it writes, there are some Indigenous groups with more visibility, and the issues of those groups are often centered and more supported. For example, federally recognized tribes here in the US have sometimes more visibility, or within Oceania or Hawaii, Polynesian islands may have some more visibility depending on context or circumstance. And the question is, do you see that the Indigenous communities that have more social power or visibility make every effort to support the more perhaps marginalized Indigenous groups? And this is open for all panelists if you would like to jump in whenever you can. And thank you to the attendee for this wonderful question.
This question is making me think about a really good. Oh, Stan, do you want to go? Okay. This question is making me think.
Real quick, no, I'm sorry. My apologies.
Okay.
Go ahead, you first. Go ahead.
Me first?
Hey, Keolu, you first.
Okay, I'll go. Okay. So this question is making me think about a really good book. It's a recent publication by Maile Arvin called Possessing Polynesians. She talks specifically about possessing, how Polynesians and Hawaiians were associated with this possessive whiteness that distinguished us from other parts of the Pacific, namely what colonists would call Melanesia, described by their dark skin. And she talks, and so first of all, I highly recommend folks read this book. It's really, really good, especially if you want a nuanced conversation on white supremacy and what it looks like in the Pacific, especially in this time when we're realizing as Pacific people how much anti-Blackness has been internalized into our communities and then weaponized against Black folks who are both Hawaiian and Pacific, or perhaps from other parts of the world. But one of the things she talks about is the way that Hawaii becomes a stand-in for all of Polynesia, and the way Polynesia becomes a stand-in for the Pacific. And in that work, the rest of the Pacific and Oceania effectively gets erased. The important thing about her text that I took from the text is that all of that reimagining of what the Pacific is and propping up and offering visibility to folks in Hawaii and other parts of Polynesia, it's all a part of the same white supremacist project, which makes it that more important that we start to unpack and leverage our privilege as those of us who have that kind of visibility. So to kind of answer the question directly, I would say the folks who are doing the best work are trying to raise awareness for issues beyond their own immediate circumstance. I'm thinking of people like Joy Enomoto, who is Hawaiian and Black, and does an incredible amount of work, not just at the intersections of Hawaiian Pacific Blackness, but also really highlighting the issues faced by folks in what we consider Micronesia, but also West Papua, and the genocide that is taking place in West Papua to this day. I think of those kinds of people as really great examples of what real activism and real liberatory work looks like. It's this understanding that we all are liberated or none of us are liberated, especially when we start to pay really close attention to how intricately we have been affected by white supremacy, that this is something we need to really detangle in a really meaningful way. So I would love to see more Kanaka, myself included, be far more intentional about the way that we frame our issues, and the way that we bring other folks into conversation to see the intersections of how this violence is taking place, because it is absolutely true that Hawaiians in particular, out of pretty much everyone in the Pacific, we have the most visibility, and that does come with a cost. A part of that comes with the cost of like this paradise mystique that brings millions of harmful people to our shores every year, even during a pandemic. But even with that said, that cost is not enough to completely overcome the fact that we do have this visibility and we should use it. And we should use it for the benefit of others.
Agreed.
Thank you, Dr. Osorio.
Well, can I jump in on that? I just want to add too, that was so elegant, just EK bombs. But like, just when we think about dismantling white supremacy in terms of like the quote unquote empirical perspectives too, I like that idea of like, somehow we have these like just completely artificial divisions between all of our oceanic cultures, right? And that's in context of colonialism, and that's by design. But like when we look genetically too, it's like we're discovering mutations that exist in our genomes. Maybe they're Hawaiian and Tahitian and Maori, but they also exist in Micronesian, quote unquote, communities and Chamorro communities. So that division is so artificial. It's not even represented accurately scientifically. It's just by design to separate us. So I just wanted to add that piece to it so we can say, well, now it's like we're using these tools. What kinds of questions do we have that bring us together, that unify us, like Kavika Kalakaua would have, So just wanted to add that.
Thank you both for that. Dr. Rodriguez, I noticed that you might have wanted to say something earlier. Are you able to speak on that as well? I know there might be some technical difficulties. We'll give him a little second.
Yes.
Yes, he's having network issues.
When we talk about, do you hear me? Okay. All right. Do you hear me now?
We can hear you. It's just a little muffled.
Hello. Hello. Do you hear me?
Sorry, Stan. Your audio is really your audio is really garbled. We can't hear you clearly.
All right. Not even now.
Sorry, Stan.
Nothing. Let me call in.
Sounds good.
Right. It does sound like he's underwater. definitely once Stan gets his audio situated, we'll definitely weigh in and see what he has to say about that question. At the moment, we do have a few other questions from some named attendees. And so Edwina Welch, we'll have someone unmute you, and whenever you have the chance to do so, do you mind reading off your question to the panelists?
Not at all. Let me see if I can get to the actual Q&A. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce your name correctly, Punahele. I was really struck by your conversation about the uses of hip hop as you were reclaiming the language and relearning language. And it made me think about how language was ripped from lots of folks, particularly African Americans during the slave trade. And so I was interested in how, and Dr. Osorio had already started talking about this idea of bringing some of that back, and how basically the counterculture language of hip hop and how that's being used in resistance as people are learning and reclaiming language. So, and thank you so much for this space. I have 3 pages of notes already. So really appreciate you all.
Yeah, thank you. So one day I was in Chinatown in Oahu, and I saw this super tall, older gentleman with dreadlocks walking in Chinatown, and a crazy light popped in my head. I was like, is that Kool Herc? And yeah, for some of you that don't know, you probably know, Kool Herc is the father of hip hop. And I always had this burning question, because I always felt conflicted about cultural appropriation. And as a Hawaiian person, I'm using this Black art form. And I always tried my best to salute where hip hop came from, where the culture of hip hop came from. You know, it's something that I love. And he was walking with a friend of mine named Keolu Fox, the Mongoose, who's another Hawaiian MC. So I was like, hey, what's up, Watts? And then I asked Kool Herc, yo, what's up? What is your thoughts on non-Black artists using this Black art form, especially for like sharing their messages? And he told me hip hop was made for people in the struggle to use, and it was made for the impoverished voices to use. And his joking is like, your people already got something like hip hop. You guys do the hula, and you know that stuff that the words that is used along with the hula got some funk to it, you know. And it kind of stuck to me. I kind of was thinking of just quitting rap and singing falsetto and playing country music, but he kind of put that hand on my back and told me, you know, it's okay, as long as you're using it with a good intentions, then it's fine. So yeah, hip hop, I plan on relearning my language, and I'm just glad that it could help like me, a youth who was I guess at risk, troubled, wild, crazy. But to me, it's just being a kid from a crazy environment. So I was glad that I found hip hop as a tool, and I get to help youth use it. I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question, and for the rambling, but I hope I point across.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. That's what I was really interested in, because I think sometimes people don't say that part about it. It's a language of struggle, and it's a language of trying to reclaim ourselves from white supremacy and colonialism. And so, yeah.
I'd love to hop in real quick on this too, because I think it isn't said enough how much the struggle for Black freedom and Black liberation how much that has enabled for Hawaiian struggle for liberation and sovereignty. Not a lot of people know that our early contemporary activists were trained by Black Panthers. Like, they went and like met with the Black Panthers and like trained under their programs and brought back this idea of direct action and frontline engagement and creating community programs that would feed and educate our people. And so I think it's really beautiful the way that we were able to build these solidarities, and it makes it even more important that we take seriously how Hawaiians in particular have weaponized white supremacy against our Black kin and comrades in struggle, especially so in seeing like how influential Black liberatory thought and other indigenous liberatory thought has been to like even the movement to protect Mauna Awakea. You don't see it happen in that way, if not for the things we have learned along the way from other activists and organizers. And so, yeah, I'm stoked to like be in these relations. And I think as Hawaiians in particular who have this vast archive, and we have the opportunity, if we put in the work, to return to the archive, to reestablish those connections, I think we owe a great debt to folks who don't have that line of connection maintained, whether it be through, you know, that cultural bomb of slavery and that apocalypse, right? How can we serve other folks who don't have the privilege that we have? Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to add to, so here on at UCSD too, we've been, I mean, mostly this is like Uncle Wayne, but putting together opportunities for solidarity with African and African American communities through like simple stuff like Black Surf Week. You know, we want to shatter stereotypes, you know, shatter them. The more people from different cultures that you see in the Moana, the ocean, the better. So I feel like, you know, we're trying to work on those types of movements even here on campus.
Thank you everyone for those responses. I see, Stan, have you gotten any of your audio kind of fixed up so you might be able to answer some of these questions? And if not, we can give you a few more moments.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Better?
Much better.
Okay. So what I was going to say. Do you hear me? About, better? Okay. So what I was going to say when you were asking about, dismantling white supremacy.
Stan, go ahead and try that again.
Okay, are you ready? Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Really? Okay. So when we talk about dismantling white supremacy, one of the things that we need to take a look, do you hear me still? Is it falling apart?
We can still hear you. You're good now.
Okay. On our various Native communities, when we're talking about federally recognized vice, non-federally recognized tribal groups, to be non-federally recognized does not make you any less Native than a federally recognized people. What it does state is you do support from the federal government, whatever support that is. But one of the problems that they've inputted, and I would venture to say it's possibly happening with Native Hawaiians too, is what is the criteria for membership into your people? Is there a blood quantum criteria, things like that? That's what they have. And these have been developed in order to terminate tribes, to terminate peoples. An example, we have Kumeyaay from Baja, California, Mexico. When they come to the United States, they can be full-blooded Kumeyaay. And here in the United States, they're not listed as a Native. So these are some of the problems that we've had in the past, that part of decolonizing our mindset, decolonizing our communities will help us to become stronger as a people. Because if we continue in the path that they've taught us, they're going to terminate us. We will terminate ourselves unless we learn those lessons. That's all I have with that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez, for weighing in on that and for that vital perspective. We'll transition now to another question. It's from Ryan Wyatt, but Dr. Adam Bergasser is going to speak on this and introduce the question since he is the physics and astronomy expert on this.
Yeah, and I actually know Ryan, so I'm glad to ask his question. And I'm actually going to expand his question a little bit. So his question was, what is the path forward for Mauna Kea? It comes back to our discussion earlier about that. Is there a future in which astronomical research can coexist respectfully with Hawaiian culture? And I'm going to expand it this way. Hawaii is not the only place where there have been cultural conflicts between astronomical scientists and the Native community. Kidd Peak in Arizona is a perfect example of that. Thinking about the moon in the Navajo culture is a perfect example of this. So I'm going to broaden this out to what is the path forward for astronomical research with indigenous culture, worldwide indigenous culture? How do we respectfully collaborate in these kind of endeavors? And are there fundamental limits on that?
Maybe our scientists should start. If
Yeah,
you want.
Can. So I just want to, that's a great question, kind of loaded, right? It's like, it's not like we haven't been using the celestial sphere for thousands of years. That's how we got there, right? Like bottom line. And that defines our culture in a lot of ways. I think that, again, back to this idea of like authorization, getting the 6 people that you need to sign a piece of paper, that's not what our community wanted. And then also, I think like one of the ideas is this like rotating like musical chairs of colonialism. Because if you don't get it in Hawaii, then you're going to bring it over to Tenerife or Canary Islands. If you don't get it there, where are you going to bring it? So the version that I like is the one where we're in charge. It's a vertical integration of technologies. It's our telescope. We don't have to desecrate our aina because we want to make observations with the most cutting edge tools. The truth is, that's not even the best telescope you could have built with that money, probably. You could have made something and put it in orbit and got better snapshots of the universe. So why are you kind of making a half-ass attempt at the best technologies, and it's always at our expense? And that's the truth. If you could have created a better budget and used, like, what's it called, Adam, the adaptive optics, like the James Webb telescope and things like this. But again, you want to potentially ruin our water table, our access to fresh water, desecrate our aina, desecrate our ancestors. You even want to grind up their bones, extract their genomes, and then tell us where we came from. So it's, it's out of touch, but I like the version where we're in control of the scientific questions and we get to decide what types of technology we want to use. And that's the bottom line. So get out of the way, you know?
Love it. I want to add a little bit. I think Keolu's point that, we're Hawaiians are not at all strangers to the, God, I already forgot what it's called, the sphere. I'm taking a navigation class right now, and I'm really bad at it because I'm not good at astronomy. Even Hawaiian astronomy, I don't understand how things move in the sphere.
That's take Keolu's class.
Yeah, good, I will. So we aren't strangers to science and observation at all. Like, it's a real intense study of Hawaiian history and culture will demonstrate very clearly, especially if you're actually a scientist and not like a literature person like me, very clearly that we have very rigorous scientific observational questions, and we have methods towards determining those answers. But I also want to remind us, and this is something I learned from Jody Bird in her book, Transitive Empire, that the Western practice of astronomy and its history has colonial roots, and that astronomy was used as a justification for empire and the transit of empire across the world. And so we need to reckon with that history. And that's not really, I won't say that's really my responsibility or authority to reckon with that history because I'm not an astronomer or a scientist, but I think first in asking this question, like, what's the way forward between astronomy and Native people? That's got to be at the beginning of the question. Like, how do we reckon with our genealogy of how we came to be as a field and as a study in our methods, and what's come through those methods? And then I'll echo what Keolu said about who's in charge, right? On a fundamental level in Hawaii, at least, one of the really big problems is that the TNT is negotiating with the wrong people. The state of Hawaii, the University of Hawaii, Department of Land and Natural Resources, none of these people have the authority to make decisions on what happens on native seized territory. So you're talking to the wrong guys, first of all. So yeah, there's an issue of who's making these decisions. But I also want us to be really cautious in the way that we think about this as well, because I don't think it's simply enough to say, oh, TMT should negotiate with a Hawaiian governing entity. What's the closest thing to a Hawaiian governing entity we have right now? OHA. Do I want TMT negotiating with OHA about where they're going to put buildings? Not really, because I'm also paying attention to what OHA decides to do in Kaka'ako, and I'm not too fond of their decisions there either. So what's the answer here? One, yes, there is room for science and observation and rigorous questions in a native world and landscape in a way that is just and ethical. It will require us to be far more principled in how we think about what is required of that science. And then, as Keolu says, what are the research initiatives? What are the questions we actually want answered? And how are those questions and the process to answering those questions going to serve our communities rather than just simply extract from those communities? So I want to make really, really clear that yes, we want more Native Hawaiian decision makers. We want more autonomy and self-determination over our land. But we should want more than just to put people who look like me into existing systems of power. And rather, we should be thinking about how we're gonna, as Punahele talks really beautifully in his music, how are we gonna huli this system and make it more authentic to our experience and to our needs as a people. And then to be very, very direct, there's no room for telescopes on Mauna Kea, period. There's no room for development and it's not an anti-telescope thing. There's no room for schools on Mauna Kea, libraries on Mauna Kea, hotels on Mauna Kea, Christian churches on Mauna Kea. It's not a place where we build. And so if that's what it means, like if someone's looking for a way forward there, I'm just gonna say really strongly that there are thousands of people who will lay their bodies down before another building is built, any building on that mountain. Mahalo.
Thank you for that very clear and direct answer, Haile.
Oh.
Alrighty, so let's see, we have a few more minutes of this open Q&A, and we have 2 questions left, but I'd like to begin with one and also to have a prompt in mind that we have an anonymous attendee who's curious to see what kind of resources might be helpful for a beginner who wants to learn more about how to live in the US while also being respectful and constantly acknowledging that we are on Native land. So if there are any sources that any of our participants or panelists could put into the chat to maybe link some of these resources for all of our attendees, that would be really wonderful. And as we kind of close out this Q&A session, I'd like to ask all of the panelists, how have you navigated being Indigenous in academic spaces that are so inundated with Western knowledge systems and that seek to or continue to invalidate Indigenous knowledge systems? If you want to speak specifically about UCSD or in your own experiences elsewhere.
Well, I spent more time at the chicken fight than I ever did at any school or cutting class and going beach. And I'm thankful that I had a kumu such as Heoli. And I noticed anytime there's a space for me to mess something up and, cause pandemonium. Like I one day showed up at a Proud Boys rally and stole the speaker and rapped some crazy super pro Indigenous songs and stuff. And yeah, and I don't think I'll be accepted in academia, but I'll do my best. And I'll always try to, create balance and cause bono and create a shift to create a truly Hawaiian place of learning. And I think it's my job as a person from the environment I come from and the coast I come from. There's not a lot of academics like me who kind of, whose family had addiction issues with meth and whose friends got taken away by CPS and, whose grandma told us that she's not going to teach us her kids Olelo Hawaii because they beat her up in school because of it. I think it's just my job to, try to turn Heva into Pono, try to make rights out of positives out of negatives, and just stay strong. And I noticed that when I can't articulate things or I have any trouble, I just hit up Heoli and it'll be fine.
Thank you, Punahele, for speaking on that. I want to acknowledge too that Dr. Rodriguez, you completed your PhD here at UCSD. Would you like to contribute to this conversation here?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We hear you.
Okay. All right. For myself and my journey, it was important to have a strong support network. And I'll just say, Dr. Elena Hood and Dr. Teresa Jean Ambo were, two people that if they weren't there and, giving me support and encouragement, I would have struggled quite a bit. I would have struggled much. In other words, having that native footprint there to help each other and support each other, to back each other up, and to make success stories. That is so important. And taking it back, I am now the president of Kumeyaay Community College, the only operational tribal college in California that offers an accredited associate's for people, and bring that back. So, to those two ladies, I just want to say, Chachaya Khan, Chachaya Khan, Chachaya Khan. And what that means is I praise you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez, and thank you to all of our panelists for your wonderful engagement and just the wide variety of topics and kind of disciplines that we've dove into. That concludes our Q&A session. And at the moment, I'll go ahead and transition to Adam and see if we can conclude with some final statements from everyone.
Yeah, I also want to thank everyone for your perspectives, for your work, for your activism, for your struggles to make Indigenous futures a reality, not just something we talk about in theory. I'd like to close by giving everyone a chance to take this to the next step in the future. Where do we go from here, right? What does Trans-indigenous futures look like in the future? And maybe, Keolu, if you could talk a little bit about your Indigenous Futures Lab, that might be a good way to sort of frame this discussion.
Yeah, can start. It was actually motivated by, well, first of all, we just started it and we got some cheddar cheese and we're working with Wayne and Provost Yang and Teresa Ambo and many, many others. And we just want to be a magnet for Indigenous innovation here on campus. But like I've always been thinking about this, but it's, I saw this poster on the side of a wall at UH Manoa in the NHSS, and it said like Indigenous Futures. And I have the picture of it, but ever since that moment, and we've been talking about all of the best ways to bring all of these ideas together to just support our communities, to make healthier communities, to protect our land, to buy our Aina back from, all of these just opportunities for growth and development so that our cultures can thrive. And, ultimately, this is just the beginning. It's like a gestating seed. And we're trying to grow a whole garden and then a whole ahupua'a. And then so this is just the beginning, but ultimately we would like to create a whole ecosystem for our communities to thrive, because the truth is a lot of these education systems, they're not for us. We have to struggle to get through. We have to give a part of ourself away to earn the currency of all these letters behind our name. And I don't really think people in Hawaii care that much about that, just to be frank and honest. And so the things we do care about is all of the avenues for cultural revitalization. And like a lot of the people that are here are directly responsible for what's going on in Hawaii in our third Renaissance. So just want to say I'm honored to be here with everyone, and thank you for the opportunity, and mahalo nui, and just ma'ana.
Thank you, Professor Fox. Dr. Osorio, would you like to comment on where we go from here in terms of Trans-indigenous futures?
Yeah, one of the things I learned really beautifully from Auntie Case, actually before I ended up on the Mona in 2019, I was listening to her speak in Aotearoa at a conference, and she talked about the importance of standing for the Mona from wherever you are, and take a sign, be a sign, like share the message of this work. And I think that I've really internalized that in a meaningful way, to thinking about how are all the ways we can stand for and build around all these issues from wherever we are. And this becomes exceedingly more important when many of us are locked in because of this pandemic. So I guess the main thing I want to say is that there's a lot of people tuning in probably from different parts of California, and California, the University of California in particular, is one of the funders of the 30-meter telescope project. And if you've at all been inspired by the things we're talking about today and building this trans-indigenous future, I know that there are Native people and people of color organizing in California to put pressure on those pressure points, whether it's at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation or UC school system. And that's one huge way you can support us and the work that we're doing moving forward. But I think from a larger perspective too, the path forward is, I think about this a lot. The present feels really dark and scary, but the future is freaking bright. And I can say that really with a full heart, especially when I'm looking at people like Keolu and Stan and Punahele who have put their lives into this work. And all of us on this call are one of hundreds and thousands of other people and communities we come from who are putting their lives into this work. And so I just want to encourage people who may be having a hard time and maybe feeling like what is the point in any of this work we're doing? The world is on fire. I'm just gonna go, I don't know, I give up. I just want to encourage folks to remember that we have survived so many apocalypses before, and we've done so beautifully. And everything I know about my people and everything I know about my people tells me that there's something great coming and that we're already a part of it. And so I just want to mahalo you folks for letting me be here. Yeah, that's it. Mahalo.
Thank you, Dr. Osorio. Dr. Rodriguez, would you like to comment? Stan, I don't know if you can hear. Oh, there we go.
Sure. First of all, thank you for your words, for heart, and to view things through a Native lens, that no matter where I go in the world, no matter where we all go, we're still Native. And just because we're not home, that does not mean we can't support the people that are there. When I was in Australia, I remember walking to a group of Aboriginal people. They were mobbing, that's what they called them. And the white people were scared to be around. And I went over there and I said, I'm in your land and I just want to pay my respects and I'd like to meet your tradition. Took me around and showed me. They talked about the struggles they went through. We shared about that. What's happening at your mountain, your sacred mountain. They've done the same thing to us at Kuchama Mountain, coming in and disrupting. And when you talk about the observatory, how many of you ever heard of Palomar Mountain? Palomar Mountain, Palomar is a Kumeyaay word. It means to win with arrows. And nobody asked to put those telescopes up there. And they discount our own native science. What we have our own observatories. And the star science, the navigational science that the Polynesian people have is incredible. We were in New Zealand and they were sharing about how they navigate. That's what people know. That is not something you can pick up, just in one moment. So it speaks to the depth of our own indigenous or organic science that we have. And I think once we open ourselves up we can start learning from each other and helping each other, because we're all care of the world. Then the world will look at us as a virus or bacteria, and it will kill us. We need to remember that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. All right, Punahele, Master of Words, I'm going to give you the last word.
Okay, and I'm gonna do it the best way I know how. It's a celebration, you guys. So let's go out with a bang. Yeah. In this great future, you can't forget your past. Care for the earth to make our resources last. Fix the wrong now with no hesitation, so we can provide for our next 7 generations. We can't eat the concrete. Water is life. Treat the Aina right, and the Aina will provide. Related to the land, you can check my genealogy. Get into the water every single time she calls for me. A natural path from the mountain to the sea. My ancestors seen the real glory of Waikiki. Now all you see is pollution and desecration, all scars and effects of colonization. Born from this land, the Aina is our mama. Water bursting out from the belly of Papa. The source of wealth and life of the Mala. Water bursting out from the belly of Papa. It's not their land, they don't have the Pala Pala. Water bursting out from the belly of Papa. The source of wealth and riches for Kanaka. Water bursting out from the belly of Papa. Sometimes I wanna control the weather like I'm Pudge the fish. No risk the roots when I make it rain upon the west. Though downtrodden, my people shall possess the mana. For moments spoken from the heart, I am distinctly honored. I'd rather be Sam Cooke instead of Captain Cook. Destroy our challengers, we're tit like 50 calibers. My heart and bandages, the universe shall provide karma. And all the things that don't kill you will make you stronger. Brown power, teach my people how to love themselves. Black power, teach my people to increase their wealth. Indigenous power, teach my people to increase their health. Aloha Aina, baby, we survive cause we've been through hell. And no, my people will not fail. I love my Kanaka Maoris, we shall prevail. And all my keikis who are indigenous, move on, because your future is limitless. I teach the kids cause I got a plan. Working with the youth, shout out to Stand the Man. Represent HI till the day I drop. Trying to learn science, peace to Keolu Fox. Yeah. Smoking on the beat, spitting heat 7 days a week. I salsa dance on the sand, moving slowly. I love to sing using my voice like Keolu. Mahalo nui. Thank you guys for letting me jam.
That was awesome, Punahele. And I also want to give great shout outs to Suzanne. Sorry, so say it again. Say that again, Stan.
But yeah, thank you guys for having us, and you know it's a beautiful thing. And yeah, to answer that question, awesome. I agree. I see hope in all of us and all of our people.
All right, thank you everyone who was able to join in today. On behalf of all of us who have organized, I want to make sure to acknowledge our fantastic panelists today for their wisdom, for their words, and also all of you who were able to participate today in the presentation. This session has been recorded, so it'll be posted up from the Intertribal Resource Center website in some amount of time from now. We are really grateful to have this opportunity to share the space together. I want to give a special thanks out to the UC San Diego's Office for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and especially the Intertribal Resource Center, both of whom supported this presentation and all of the Native American Heritage Month celebrations. And I want to give a special shout out, especially to Suzanne, who I think now has a second career. Really fantastic job. And also Sarah Leclerc for their very excellent work in ASL translation. Thank you, everyone. Have a great today, and we will see you next time.